thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition and move the debate into the lower house. I would like to welcome the Member of Government from KU.
Mr. Speaker, I too cry for the poor people of Tuvalu who are losing their homes because of climate change. I too cry for the man in the United States with respiratory diseases because of the rising climate change. I pity the OG for not really bringing us anything because I have so much to do in 7 minutes. So let's move on. First of all, I'm going to talk to you about why climate change is such an urgent issue that we need an international mechanism to deal with. Secondly, I'm going to tell you why this mechanism is the best way to go and the most effective way to go in dealing with climate change. And thirdly, which was originally our only extension, about the impact of signing legal binding mechanisms. So first, let's move on to why this is an urgent issue. Now, NC and NEAO come up and tell us, you know what, everybody's dealing with it on its own. Don't worry about it. Fact of the matter is, it's an important issue on the first level of developed countries. So when we have rising sea levels and developing countries actually going down because they're losing their homes and livelihoods, we actually have United States, the European Union, paying massive funds for recovery cooperation. We see massive funds poured into development aid and etc. We see a huge waste of resources on the aspect of developed nations. Sit down, I see you. Secondly, we see an increase of respiratory diseases due to environmental changes happening in our society. These are diseases that are affecting the developed part of the world, especially the United States, where the rate of asthma for children has risen 50% over the last decade due to climate reasons. Second level, we think that developing countries are the biggest victims of climate change, and that basically, number one, they live off arable land, they live off seafood, fishing in the sea. They live off of, in other words, utilizing their natural environment. They utilize their forests. They utilize things that are burnt away, that are dying because of climate change. Secondly, we tell you that it affects the livelihoods and social development of developing countries because due to climate change, these countries are not able to make further development or further investment in terms of education or their livelihoods and so on. But furthermore, why this is an urgent issue is because it's transnational, asking for a transnational approach for delivery. In other words, when Brazil is chopping off its forests to raise more cattle, it's not really only Brazilians that are facing climate change. It's Bolivia and Paraguay, the neighboring countries that are being burnt and that are also suffering from the problems that Brazil is causing. When China actually pollutes its dams and causes other environmental damage, it's actually Korea and Japan and other Southeast Asian nations that are suffering from China's mistakes or China's policies. Therefore, that's why we believe that it's not an issue of national sovereignty. And Yang comes up here and brings us an analogy of nuclear plants. Well, we think it's dangerous, but we let countries have them anyway. Fact of the matter is, nuclear plants are only dangerous when there's an accident. But burning off forests is automatic damage to other countries. That's the clear difference. As long as you have a safety mechanism for nuclear energy, that's perfectly fine. That's your legit energy source. But burning off things and polluting things is an automatic damage, and I'm going to take Yale, not UNC.
So if the climate change is happening, so nations think that it's better to develop their economy. Why don't you let them decide?
The fact of the matter is, we've been letting them decide so far, and all they have been doing is polluting more, cutting off more, and killing more. So we don't really see how domestic nations will have that domestic approach. But furthermore, let's move on to our second extension, which is why this mechanism is the way to go. The biggest difference is we think domestic approaches are good. We think United States Clean Air and Energy Act, excellent. But the fact of the matter is, international mechanisms are simply better. Why are they better? Because it's a uniform goal and a uniform principle that all countries unilaterally abide by. We think that very setting of that goal and principle, and furthermore, by providing targets so that these countries can be binded towards achieving that goal and principle, is the only way that a transnational problem can be solved supranationally. We tell you, the OG did somewhat explain to you that is the flexibility of international mechanisms, that we do acknowledge domestic influences, we do acknowledge domestic needs, but at the end of the day, we allow different approaches, different roads to the same uniform goal. That is what legal binding international mechanisms achieve, ladies and gentlemen, and that is why we believe that is the way to go, along with all these excellent approaches that United States, China, Chile are taking, because we think it's not mutually exclusive, but rather we want to take a better road. No. Now, moving on to a furthermore explanation. Why is an international mechanism even better and further better? Because we believe that it allows the reduction of disparity among capabilities. What do we mean by this? Under international mechanisms that have targets, we don't simply say, reduce 5%, do your best, good luck. We actually say there are certain ways you can achieve it by giving technology, by giving resources, so that we as the entire globe can approach that together. You can't do that domestically, or you can't do that bilaterally, because that's what causes disparities, the problems that the OO points out. Because we tell you, under Kyoto, it wasn't simply China, good luck, Brazil, good luck. It was kind of like, United States, we have green technology, let's all share so we can develop all up from it. We think that disparity among capabilities is only reduced, and is only able to be reduced under an international mechanism of legal binding power. But thirdly and utmostly, so after we do this, after we have all countries unilaterally sign under a legal binding target international agreement, what happens? We believe that by ratifying this policy is setting a target. Now, when you have a clear target, it means you're going to have actions, policies, and procedures in achieving that target. What do actual actions achieve? It's achievement of goals. When you don't have a specific target, like how much percent of carbon dioxide you're going to reduce, or how much percent of degree that you're going to reduce in the globe, you simply do not have the specific steps towards that step. That's why MDG, Millennium Development Goals, is actually praised because it was setting 10 principles and 10 specific goals that the United Nations as a whole was going to work towards. We believe the same applies for international climate change, that when you have a target, you take actions specifically. Why is this fact important? Because we think only when actions are taken, achievements occur. And why is this mechanism of achievement occurring important? Because this is what stabilizes the international community as a whole. And this is what empowers the international community as a whole. Because right now, Madam Speaker, or Mr. Speaker, we see a disparity of superpowers, some countries doing things because simply they have more money or they have more military. But we tell you, when we have a strong international mechanism in precedent regarding climate change, we see future development in other areas of human rights, of international development, of economic disparity. We tell you, only when legal binding mechanisms expand to further spheres can our international community develop as a whole and be strengthened as a whole. Because ultimately, we live in a globe with 200-something countries. If we do not have all these countries under the same principle, how are we as planet Earth able to develop into the next level? So for those very reasons, we're very proud to propose this initiative.
Thank member of government for her speech, and I'd like to welcome the member of opposition from ICU 1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very disappointed in this Korean debate of how the opening government has never been able to provide us a mechanism on which why a new and important conferences would be done, and how new treaties would be signed when you make people who don't want to sign in the treaty join, ladies and gentlemen. We think in the end this is going to be counterproductive to the protection of the environment, and I'm going to provide extensions on that. We think that our government fails on this ground because the principal justification of this air proposal is that there is going to be environmental benefits. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that is absolutely untrue, and I'm going to tell you why that is. So, ladies and gentlemen, 3 points of the extension. Firstly, I'm going to tell you how we can actually achieve cooperation under our model. And secondly, I'm going to tell you why the cooperation of the status quo is going to be actually hindered by taking that proposal. And lastly, why we think that economic growth is necessary in order to make sure that transfers of technology and these kind of things would actually reach the developing world and in this global economy. But before going into these things, I'm going to give a couple of rebuttals to what we heard so far from the closing government. Now, basically the first part of the extension was that this is a very urgent problem. Ladies and gentlemen, well, the thing is, what we are going to say is that unless you take the right process of negotiations and make sure that people would voluntarily join in these treaties, we think in the future this is going to be counterproductive. Secondly, they have told us that technology transfers is going to be possible when you have every nation cooperating. Firstly, we say that bilateral treaties is going to be enough all the time, as we see how there has been agreements between countries like Sweden and Denmark. And also we think that this kind of technology of transfers is going to be impossible if they take their model, and economy is going to be really bad. Now, having told us no, sit down. So, first extension, how do we achieve cooperation? Ladies and gentlemen, we think that we can reach cooperation by creating role models where sustainable development is actually achievable, where growth and environmental protection can exist at the same time, ladies and gentlemen. Now, most states, we think, actually recognize the importance of environmental protection, but they want to develop because that's what their citizens want, and they have to make themselves accountable to these citizens. No, sit down. And that's why, in the status quo, they can only reach and join treaties when it is proven clearly, scientifically, that economic growth is actually achievable alongside with environmental protection. So what we see in the status quo is a great trend, ladies and gentlemen, when we see that the international community realizing the importance of sustainable development. For example, COP15 knows it down, which they think is actually a failure. We think it's a great thing because in COP15, every nation agreed on sustainable development under the slogan of common but separate responsibilities, which ensure sustainable development. That is why countries like China, countries like India actually agreed on it, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that this is important. So what's going to happen in a couple of years, ladies and gentlemen, is that China and India, or these countries, nations which have agreed to it, are going to take on programs domestically and scientifically prove that their mechanisms is actually achieving achieving sustainable development when they can actually have both economic growth and developing at the same time. And only when it is scientifically proven, note it down, and you have role models and existing precedences on when that is possible, can other nations think about joining that treaty, ladies and gentlemen. This is because then they have no political capital to say, hey, well, I'm not going to join in. No, sit down. Now, I think this is going to be destroyed, ladies and gentlemen, while taking this proposal, which is my second extension. Now, ladies and gentlemen, no, sit down. We think when you enforce other nations who want to develop at the same time as having environmental protection to join these treaties, what's going to happen is that these people, in the first place, maybe not join conferences because under the model, if you haven't joined in the discussion, you are not binded by it. But secondly, if these people join these process of treaty creation, no, sit down, I think that all the discussion in these international conferences are just going to be harmed and not reach any conclusion whatsoever. Because the discussion and the debate that goes on is going to be stagnant, ladies and gentlemen, because developing nations who want to develop are going to be very awkward in signing a treaty which has no scientific proof, no, sit down, of achieving growth for these people. And that is why we think this is going to be harmful, because their policy on their side of the house relies on the fact that treaties will be signed and will be created, ladies and gentlemen. We think that is going to be harmed. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, even if he can reach some agreement, it is going to be very weak agreements like Kyoto Protocols, ladies and gentlemen. It has actually failed with having 80% of the ratifying nation actually increasing CO2 emission over the last 20 years, ladies and gentlemen. And we think by having an existing treaty, it harms the creation of a new treaty as well. We see this because we see it in places like the Treaty on Conservation of Tunas, ladies and gentlemen. You have one international agreement, and countries like Japan, claim that because we have one treaty, why do we need another one, ladies and gentlemen? That's why the protection of tuna is not working. Note it down. And having a very weak standard of environmental protection created once, that is going to harm future negotiations. And we think that is harmful because in the end, you need a lot of things because you don't know what kind of disasters are going to happen in the future, and that is a harmful closing.
Okay, the fact that Kyoto failed is because not a lot of countries ratified it. The principle behind it was giving a different timeline to different countries so sustainable development was possible. Prove to us how that's not possible under an international mechanism.
No, we have proven to you when we see that if some nations, like the one who joined Kyoto, if they actually made sure that they actually did reduce CO2 emission, other nations will see it as a good thing and join in, ladies and gentlemen. And we think it's the fault of these people, it is the fault of Kyoto Protocol, not that not many nations joined in. To my third extension about the economy, ladies and gentlemen, opening opposition told us how this actually harms development in the developing world. What we add is that some nations are just not capable of reducing CO2 emission, ladies and gentlemen, because CO2 emission reduction takes a lot of money and time, and some nations are just so poor that they can't do it. And what happens is that because we live in an intertwined economy, the harm of the economy in the developing world harms the development of the global world, ladies and gentlemen, because they produce cheap goods which is exported to our world. And what happens when the economy of the advanced world goes down is that there's going to be less investment in these kind of fields of transfer, of creating technology and so on. This is a harm we are not going to bear. And at the end of the day, we think this policy is absolutely counterproductive, and therefore none of the government side can win this debate because they just haven't solved the problem that they have proposed. Thank you.
We thank the member of opposition, and may I now welcome the government whip.
Mr. Speaker, I was quite confused with the closing opposition, as they seem to actually argue for our case, arguing for sustainable development, and then like every country has different target and different situations, so therefore international mechanism will work. And thankfully, they mentioned CDR, common but differentiated responsibility, saying that yes, international treaties and international conventions do recognize common but differentiated responsibility, and that is the whole point. My member has told you how international treaties will actually, under the same goal, would give different targets and allow different approaches to achieve that goal. And we think under that model, sustainable development or economic development of developing countries are 100% achievable, unlike what the closing opposition argue. So as a government whip, we have 3 questions to address to you. The first question is climate change an urgent issue that overrides sovereignty issue? And the second question that I have is international approach better, or the approach that opposition is proposing to you is better? And the third question that I would like to discuss will be the impact of the action that were taken by the government side. Now, having that said, let me take a look at what the closing opposition has brought to our table. They talk about how sustainable development will be possible. Mr. Speaker, I already told you how that we can actually set goals to achieve sustainable development under international treaties. We actually have talked a lot about sustainable development in every international environmental treaties, Madam Speaker, because without developmental guarantee, then no country will actually participate in the process. So we do acknowledge that economic development and environment protection can go together. They seem to just have this black and white logic that when you achieve environmental protection, suddenly your economy will be destroyed. But Mr. Speaker, is that really the case? It's not really do so. You develop while minimizing the damage on the environment. You can still try to reduce the emission level that you have for greenhouse gases, but at the same time, try to develop and have green factories installed to develop economy. So we think economic development and environment protection is not mutually exclusive, and that falls and that's why they fail. And also on the second level, Madam Speaker, they said that they won't then go to conferences. But is that really true, Madam Speaker? We actually have seen after the Rio conference that first discussed climate change, there has been numerous international conventions. There has been numerous international conferences that where numerous nations of the world participated, despite the fact that yes, maybe it might harm your economy. We see that developed countries, first of all, has incentives, as my member told you, because they have to spend massive amount of money in recoveries of developing countries. At the same time, if they are damaged, they will also be the one to spend money for their own recovery. And we also talked to how developing countries are the ones primary victims of this climate change because they heavily depend on agriculture. Their industry itself is dependent on primary industry, and if their environment is damaged through climate change, what way do they have? They say the opening government said they can go to factories, but Madam Speaker, a lot of countries in Africa, that like 70% is agriculture. Just because your 30% is somehow hindered a bit doesn't mean the economy will suddenly collapse, and the 70% people lose this job. Is that really good for your economy? We think that we should protect the larger share. No, thank you. And also on the third level, how urgent is the issue? The Kyoto Protocol has failed because the people have not participated. Exactly so, Madam Speaker. We think that all nations should ratify these targets to make Kyoto Protocol or whatever protocol that we have effective, Madam Speaker. We think the reason the failure of the Kyoto Protocol is the not full participation of the nations, and we think by forcing these countries to participate, we'll be able to achieve the goals. And we think the mechanism itself was very good because we had the same goal. Under that, we allowed different approaches. We also think that the urgency issue is a bit different because in the past, when Rio was first there, people didn't really realize the seriousness of climate change. It has been 14 years, Madam Speaker. The urgency is very different. Countries are sinking, including your country, Japan. We also think that it's very urgent and that the urgency issue is changing. So going into the first question that I have before I do this.
Okay, can you give me any example of the success of your powers? Because we said you harms national sovereignty, which like harms like organic changes.
The reason why there has been big success because countries don't participate fully. And we think that the all nations that signed that treaty should participate and should ratify the legal targets to achieve the goals, and action should be involved. No, thank you. And the first question, is climate change really an urgent issue? We told you that it is so. It not only affects your country, even if your country is not affected, the other countries are damaged by your action. If China emits CO2 in your country, that actually undermines the effort made in South Korea to target or combat climate change. And let's say some country didn't really care about climate change, still be damaged because the climate is regulated. Thank you. Therefore, we think that it's not really a sovereign issue, but it's more of a transnational, international issue that everybody should be responsible, everybody should take action to. So we think the sovereignty issue is not really a problem in the status quo, in that motion, that actually it's an international issue that everyone has to participate, everyone has to make efforts to. And the second question, Madam Speaker, is international approach better? Haven't already told you how international approach allows this room for diversity. And we think actually that tackles the argument that comes from the opening and the closing opposition saying that people will suddenly see economic destruction. But we think that first of all, setting a uniform goal on principle is actually good because without that goal, we don't have any guarantee that countries will participate or countries will make some efforts to combat climate change. So setting a goal itself is very important. And then we allow different approaches to achieve that goal, considering the different conditions and different situations countries are in. We also think that binding targets are especially necessary because it involves action. The past treaties or past conventions that only emphasize the principles didn't really have that much of an effect because it didn't involve action. It didn't really require the actual policies to meet the targets. We also think by having international cooperation, it will lead to more exchange of technology, exchange of resources, unlike the opposition say, because we think that to achieve that same goal, it requires cooperation under that mechanism. And on the third level, then what kind of impact would it have? Madam Speaker and Mr. Speaker, they say that it will victimize the poor. It will be bad for economic development. But Madam Speaker, we already proven to how the poor is the one who will be most affected by the climate change. We already told you how both developing countries and developed countries have a stake under this issue. So we think that actually it helps both parties by participating in this motion. We also think that this meeting targets in the national treaty doesn't really mean that your economy will suddenly be destroyed. So we think that on the impact level, the action will be involved. We will be able to achieve something finally out of our international treaty. That's why we think that all nations should ratify the international binding targets.
Thank the government whip, and to close the whole debate, I now welcome the opposition whip speaker.
imagine BP adjudication. If you discuss maybe 5% or 6% or 30%, actually it is very difficult to make consensus. That is what our extension. We say such kind of international consensus is very, very, very difficult. It's especially in this issue, the economic incentive is very relatively. So therefore we say it is not good for the tackling this environmental issue. Moreover, we say we have to show the role model for the every country and making the voluntary incentive to tackle with this problem is a very important, we say, and they never engaged. Anyway, I have the two issues. First issue is about the workability of this international protocol. And secondly, why the voluntary incentive is important. So anyway, I want to point out the crucial failure of this full government side. As NC pointed out, OG actually not good. Yes. Because they generally said international is important, but they never told you that. Why it is workable? Why such kind of they can make the consensus? They never told you. And CG is a little bit better. They somehow try to say the international achievement or international purpose or international agreement has a strong idea or strong power to force them everyone. However, Mr. Speaker, big crucial failure. They never proved us why such kind of agreement or discussion can be going well. Why such kind of agreement or purpose can be a good for the environment. But my partner clearly pointed out to you, such kind of agreement or consensus can be very, very, very big stance, Mr. Speaker. So therefore we say it is not workable. And the government whip told you that. Our burden of proof is that maybe they participate in this discussion and that's all. But we say this burden of proof is totally low and low and low. They have to prove why such kind of discussion or agreement can be made very well situation or can be tackled to the environmental situation or so forth. They never proved for us. So therefore we say they're okay, bye-bye. Anyway, first criteria about the workability. Firstly, we say the voluntary incentive is important, and international consensus or so forth doesn't work anyway. And OG also agreed. When I do the point of information and I said why the voluntary incentive is important, and the PM, maybe DPM? But anyway, they respond that. Yeah, I know that the nation seeks the benefit of their nation or so forth. So therefore, Kyoto Protocol is failed. They told you that. Yeah, of course. So therefore, the Kyoto Protocol is failed because the nation has a strong incentive to protect their benefit, to protect their economy. So therefore, we say even after taking this proposal, because they never proved us why such kind of incentive will change. So therefore, such kind of protocol or agreement will fail, Mr. Speaker. So therefore, we say the workability doesn't happen. And moreover, we say my partner clearly told you that even if they can make agreement between the whole nation, this agreement can be very weak to tackle to the environmental problem. We agree that environmental problem is bad, and we have to solve such kind of things. However, Mr. Speaker, such kind of weak agreement or weak consensus is more harm to our tackle. That's simply because because of the existence of the weak agreement, they neglect the effort, making the effort to tackle with such kind of things. So because such kind of strong power of the CG told you that, because, yeah, of course, yeah, I know the international purpose or international consensus, I do that. That's all. I don't have any, no, thank you, any duty to tackle with such kind of things. Such kind of sense, such kind of incentive for every country is, but the crucial failure is why such kind of strong agreement can be achieved. In this case, they never told you. And yeah, okay.
The good thing about having a uniform goal is that it requires action from even those who would not voluntarily engage, Madam Speaker, therefore achieving the result out of such agreements.
Yeah, but please tell me that why this goal can be enough to tackle environmental problem. We clearly told you such kind of goal can be very lower and lower and lower. So therefore we say we cannot tackle to the such kind of environmental problem. Okay? And secondly, we say that about the why voluntary incentive is a very, very important. Yeah. Clearly told you that. Yeah, the solvency is important. And my partner further extended you that why such kind of consensus or why such kind of domestic consensus is important. Why such kind of developing country person or developed country person can see the role model is a very, very important. If people can see about the very good sustainable development role model, actually they can accept such kind of suggestion, Mr. Speaker. But under the status quo, this cannot be happen. Simply because all nation, all person knows that the USA or Japan or some kind of other country can be rich because they emit many CO2 or so forth. They just only see this role model, Mr. Speaker. And we propose it. We have to destroy this role model and we have to create this new role model, Mr. Speaker. And if we make this new role model, actually such a voluntary incentive will happen in the domestic level of each country. And we say it is a more better for the every country, Mr. Speaker. And more simply because if all persons accept such kind of incentive, actually they can tackle with such kind of problem, or they can go together to the such kinds of problem as a nation, as a whole nation. So therefore we say that international voluntary consensus is very important. However, on the other hand, in this proposal, maybe international society making the very weak purpose, and moreover, the other person, the domestic person, never agreed this role model also. So therefore we say it is a bad. So therefore we are very proud to oppose this motion. Thank you.